Welcome back to Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom. I'm Brendan Davis, your host, and today's episode is our first show with an interview guest since I have rebooted it back in Beijing. Today's guest is Tom McGregor. Tom is a journalist. He's a writer. He writes for many outlets. He's worked for many of the outlets here in China, and he has a book coming out later this year that we're going to talk about in the show. Tom is an interesting guy. I really enjoy his writing, and this is a pretty good example, I think, of where I'm going with this show. It's not going in a more political direction, although we do touch on politics here a bit, related especially to China's role in the world stage and the U.S.-China situation at the moment. But it's an example of how I want to have these deeper conversations. And I've enjoyed these sort of My China Story type of shows, and sometimes that's going to still come up, and we're going to touch on a little bit of that so you know who you're listening to if it's someone you're not familiar with. But in the case of Tom, it's interesting to me because we, in probably 90-95% of the things we would talk about, we're very in sync, or we don't have the same point of view, but we understand each other's point of view and can relate to it. And then there's that little bit of overlap where we don't overlap, which specifically in this case is, as Tom says in the interview, he is this weird dichotomy because he's very pro-China, but he's also very, very pro-Trump. And if you listen to my show, you know that I'm rooting for our country to succeed. I'm not rooting against my president, but I'm not a fan of the man, right? And the policies, and basically, I hope that he's not the president after the next election cycle. Let's say that. So it's really, it was a little bit tricky to navigate doing this in terms of a way that isn't totally sort of bland. But we also, my nature is not to do a screen fest type of a show. Tom can do a very high energy show. He appears on the show Dialogue on CGTN sometimes, and he's known for his very vocal performances and opinions, expressing himself. It's very true to him. It's not a performance in the sense of it being a scripted false thing, but his energy when he gets going on this is very dynamic. But what I really liked about this, and what Tom and we communicated, I'm not telling tales, we communicated about this both before and after the fact, is, he appreciated from what, he said about the fact that we had this respectful tone. And so that's what I'm going for. And honestly, look, I'm not a journalist. I'm a film producer. I do podcasting because I love it, and I want to get deep. And I'm typically coming from my wheelhouse is trying to find emotional truth as it relates to a story. That's my basis professionally of what I do on the creative side besides the business side. But I also, once upon a time, there's a great story, and the setup doesn't matter, but the late, great Gary Shandling, the comedian and writer, he was being interviewed by somebody, and he was, being very thoughtful and having very serious answers. He wasn't doing like Gary Shandling's stand-up. And the interviewer was basically saying, but you're not being very funny. And he said, well, I'm funny on stage, but, when I go home, I like to think about things. So, like the real guy is actually very thoughtful. So I want to be able to be more of who I am on this show. And not that I'm, playing a character, but I'm not this animated necessarily in real life. And unless I get really hopped up on a lot of coffee. But I really enjoy being able to talk to people about real stuff. And that's what I'm going to endeavor to do. And sometimes it'll be real and real funny, which Kevin Geiger and I have a return of the Fretful Lauai Radio Hour episode of Big Fish in the can that I'll drop next week. And as I continue to do this, I'm going to seek a balance. I'm not going to try to be more serious than sort of my pay grade deserves, But I do want to get into things that have some impact and can be at least a reference point for this moment in time. So I hope you enjoyed this episode and that you like the slightly new direction for Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom. Don't forget to check the show notes for more information. Tom gave me a plethora of links to various things to contact him, find him, his writing, his opinions, or connect with him if you want to online. That's all going in the show notes. You can visit crazyinagoodway.com for more about that. But now, please do enjoy this interview with Tom McGregor. Well, I'm I'm here today with Tom McGREGOR. Tom, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm better now that I'm trying take two on this intro because I forgot the name of my own podcast.
Well, no problem.
Would only you know that until I told the people.
Sure.
And that's because you're the first guest on the rebooted Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom version 2.0, we'll call it. And this series is going to get a bit more real. I'm going to get a little, still have fun and friendly questions here and there, but I do want to talk to people who really have something to say. And I think you're the perfect guest to start us off with, not to butter your biscuit too much right out of the gate.
I'll be ready.
Sweet. Please give us the short version of who you are, where you're from, and why China, and then we're going to unpack all that and get into the details.
Sure. Right at this very moment, I'm working for cctv.com. I write commentaries on politics. I deal with a lot of the serious issues that are related to China. As well, also I'm a contributor, I write a column for Channel News Asia, which is now known as CNA, based in Singapore. And I'm going to have a new book coming up. It's called U.S. vs. China, From Trade Wars to Reciprocal Deal.
Excellent. Yeah. It sounds like a fun reading. Reading.
I'm not an economist, so it was interesting when the publisher first approached me, but she found me through Quora. Yeah. I had dealt with a lot of the sensitive issues on China. She was very impressed. They were looking for someone who could write a fair a book about both sides, about U.S. and China. And what happens a lot is when you're writing about China, either you love it or you hate it. There's very little middle ground.
Right.
But people who are a lot of my fans, who are my readers, they support me because I don't go to the extreme on pro-China.
Right.
And so it sounds more, I focus more on logic. So when I was writing about the U.S.-China trade wars deal, it wasn't about numbers or about tariffs. It was about a difference in culture.
Right, and that's many of the issues come down to that. It comes down to cultural issues, and this isn't meant as promo-y, but how China works. That's really the stock in trade. That's most of what we talk about.
Definitely,
we get into the nuts and bolts, but often the answer is because culture,
of course,
and because not understanding it or not respecting it or whatever.
Exactly.
So for you, where are you from? Actually, let's do a little bit of that biographical backgroundy stuff.
Sure, I'm from Dallas, Texas, USA. I was born there, so I'm familiar with the Southern life.
There you go.
Yeah. And basically, when I came to China, I came here in 2010.
Okay. And you had been, as I understand, you did a minute in Asia around. You were in Korea,
South Korea,
before, right?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. I was an ESL teacher, but of course, at that time, that was where I started my journalism career. I was working with some web news websites there. They were very excited because when I wrote articles, and if there were a lot of people complaining, I didn't care.
Nice.
So the South Koreans respect that.
You can have a thick skin about that, and
exactly. That's very important because I believe as a writer, your message is about what your observations are and then explaining that. A lot of times, and I've seen this too often in the current mainstream media, and this is another reason why I wrote the book, is you have a lot of reporters who write what they think readers want to read, or they're just trying to make themselves popular with certain groups.
Sure.
So I was never that. So it's always interesting. I come to China, I write a lot of pro-China stuff, of course, but it's because I believe in it. I believe, I see China sort of like as an underdog, which is sort of like the story of my life. I've always been an underdog. So there's a lot of misunderstanding with China, and I also believe they support peace. If they didn't support peace, I would not be here. My main goal in life, my main mission in life, I believe, is to be a messenger of peace.
Yeah, that is a fantastic orientation to the world. I think it's obviously a great message. You are known, at least to me, from a lot of your writing, where you really don't pull punches. And this isn't said to self-flatter, but I mean, my goal, even on the friendlier shows that I've done, has been to be real.
Sure.
Because I've tried to, I want this to be fun and entertaining for people, but also, kind of a public service in a way, because it makes people, China smarter, which does sound promo-y.
Sure.
But for you especially, how did you sort of find this voice? I imagine this started pre-journalism and then it became this passion. How did you find this voice to speak your truth, as they say?
I want to speak for the underdog. I want to speak for the voiceless, those who are just not heard, those who get ignored. That was the story of my life. I was the kind of guy that people didn't pay attention to, and if they thought I wasn't really taken seriously. Even when I went to, say, the good schools, I was always the guy who just ordinary, nothing special. So I discovered at a time in my life there when I had a severe depression that I was very interested in writing stories. I was very interested in writing. And I discovered that was my voice. And if I can be the voice for those people who had similar problems as me, I want to be that person. And also discovered that when I came here to China, there's a lot of people, they're shy. I'm shy too. I'm very shy. A lot of people said if I wasn't shy, I'd be a millionaire by now. But the fact is I am. That's who I am. But also at the same time, that shyness gives me an independent thinking. Mm-hmm, I refuse to just ask people, what do you want me to say? Right. I'm going to tell you what I'm thinking. It's just the way my nature is. I've always been that way. It's hard to make friends that way, but the fact is those who who bare their souls, mm-hmm. who are very honest. To me, my belief is those are the best writers. Those are the best messengers.
Those are the people, regardless of someone's allegiance with a particular writer's, metaphysics, for lack of a less encompassing term, you can still appreciate and love it. I mean, you don't have to be a, bisexual junkie to appreciate William Burroughs. Of course. And it maybe even helps if you're not, because you're not a junkie and you're more coherent. But being able to walk in somebody's shoes is fascinating. And those perspectives, again, that's part of why I like having these conversations. Sure. So, I normally do a little bit of sort of your China story, but not in excess, because I like to get to the meat of it, and especially because there's so much going on in the world right now. Where just maybe name check a few of the places where you cut your teeth in journalism and writing, and then let's really get into the present day and what's happening.
Mainly Seoul, South Korea. When I first started, mm-hmm. I had some articles published. I was able to get some recognition, angered a few politicians. One of my favorite stories was I was working for one website that was very popular with the South Korean president, but when I started criticizing him, he stopped reading it. Uh-oh. So one day, he was at a press conference, and they asked him, well, President No, Roh Moo-hyun was president at that time. Why you stopped reading Oh My News? He says, they have a terrible writer.
You're like, mission accomplished.
Yeah, it was a great feeling.
Oh, wow. And so you came to China, and you've sort of run the gamut of the various media outlets that you could work for here.
All the experiences you can imagine.
All the three initial places. Sure. CRI and...
China Daily. Mm-hmm. I've also been on the Dialogue show a few times, had some fun Scream Fest with Yang Ray. He says he misses me. I'll be back, Yang Ray. I'm ready for another fight.
Wow. All right. Yeah, I was confused. What's the lady's name? The very severe, short-haired lady.
I know
that's who I was thinking about. Yeah, that's who I thought we were messaging.
She once invited me, but she was out of town on the day. It was.
Okay. Yeah, I enjoy. It didn't work out. I enjoy. When I'm in the mood for that flavor of soda, I enjoy that for a minute. But it's entertaining. That's a strong drink. If you're not in the mood for it, it's the wrong thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you need a thick skin. You need a thick skin.
Yeah, you have to be into that. And so, what has been like? When you started out, did you start right away with this pursuit of truth and justice, or
It was a long, hard fought battle. The first thing I wanted to do after college was to be, write novels and write stories, mm-hmm, but I didn't realize it's not that easy to make money. Right. So then, eventually, my logic light bulbs turned on and said, "Why don't you do journalism?" So I tried that, but then in American media, it's very competitive, very challenging. Right. So when I put my CV in around a little bit before 2010, at that time I was working on a blog called Dallas Blog, but I had not any mainstream media experience. Mm-hmm. So I threw out my resume all over the place, all over the world. The only people who contacted me back were the Chinese media.
Interesting.
So I came here, but I wanted to come back to Asia. So it was just sort of like, it was fate that made it happen.
Nice. And I know that you sort of worked your way from, did you say copy editing?
From the bottom up. I mean, it was a hard fought battle.
Sure.
It was not easy.
What were some of those lessons that you like the less generic and more personal or meaningful lessons?
Because people will contact me all the time. Oh, Tom, give me a job. Do this. Don't contact big guys for jobs. You have to prove yourself.
Yeah.
Show your writing. Let your writing speak for itself. Let whatever you do speak for itself. If I'm going to notice you, I will contact you.
That's great advice. And in terms of, I get, because I do a lot of consulting and talking about Hollywood stuff for people. And I'm glad to do it. And I'm glad to, as much as I have the bandwidth and the patience,
but they're looking for the easy way.
Some people, yeah. But the ones who aren't, though, okay, those are the people who are going to be successful.
Sure.
Is because you can kind of like pull your own string and, motivate yourself. What's something that stands out to you as let's call it a big break, for lack of a
of course, my big
term.
Break.
Yeah.
Well, it's actually been recent, because what's interesting was even at China Radio International for some time I had a column, it was still tough getting a response, especially from Westerners. So I would say my big break was when my boss told me to work on a project called Quora. Mm-hmm. On Quora, you had a lot of great writers, and at the time, when I first started, within 2 months, I had 1 million views.
Yeah.
I was all pro-China, and I did not hide it. The fact is I focused on logic. I said, look, I'm going to write what I believe in. I think when the reader saw it, they wanted to see an alternative opinion, because there were so many anti-China stories out in the media.
Sure.
So they wanted to hear, well, what does a person who's pro-China, who's not Chinese, what is their opinion? So they sort of view me as that guy. So when that break happened, then suddenly I get a publisher who was a real publisher. It wasn't, a fake. They weren't asking me for money.
Right.
These people were going to invest in the book. And they're based in Singapore, World Scientific Publishing.
Okay.
So I've been very impressed with them. And then I would say that was the biggest break, because then it also helped me get the column at Channel News Asia. And with Channel News Asia, I've had one of my commentaries appear on Drudge Reports.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And they said that after that, their website numbers went big.
And how often do you publish on there?
Once a week.
Yeah, it seems like, you send me stuff here and there, and some...
And everybody else.
No, I'm sure. Yeah. No, I don't think I'm special.
In my circle.
I don't think I'm special.
No, but
not in that way.
What it is I show people I'm just a hard worker.
Sure.
That's why I do what I do.
But I know you had. We don't have to get into the details, but I know from our pregame chat that you went to a 5-day-a-week column at a previous job,
sure.
And so that kind of training just has to you just learn how to process.
You just do the job.
Yeah.
You just everything's got to be a deadline. And even when the publisher gave me a deadline, I had 6 months to write a book. When I first saw it, I was, I can't do this. They've had Nobel Prize winners lined up, and it's on the website. How am I going to write? But I was great, because my editor, Dong Lishi, basically she said, look, we're not looking for academics. We're looking for someone who's on the ground, who has a good understanding of China, and who also has a good understanding of Trump. Because if you look on my social media, I'm sure you'll see that I'm very pro-Trump as well.
I see that, and this is where we differ. And,
no
and again, I have friends across all the spectrums, and I'm not in the tank for any team.
Sure.
So I'm actually. I'm pretty moderate. I average to moderate because I'm very social.
Very polarized. The American politics is so polarized. It's unbelievable.
It is.
I went to a visit to Texas to bring my wife and son in Texas about 2-3 years ago. I was shocked. It was like miserable.
Yeah,
just to see the politics and news media.
Well, and that's the
very
thing.
Disturbing.
This will lead back to China for a minute, but part of why I wasn't sure where to land you show wise, because if I knew you better, which you could fit in there, and we would just have, it would be a different conversation, more related to that. But I think we'll manage to make it work all in this one piece here. But that was what struck me from being back, because I just got back from what I jokingly call my world tour. I was in and out of the States, and I was in Paris, which was great.
Sure.
But my time back in the States, again, I'm a California guy. I'm in California, and that's more in sync with
more polarized.
Well, and that's more in sync with my vibe basically. Sure. But at the same time, there's just a feeling of misery and doom, and I hate to promote it even further, because
that's why I try to stay positive. I try to stay neutral.
Yeah, and
it's out of control,
and everyone seems to be. Well, it's not so much the circles that I run in, because, again, fortunately, entertainment is up its own butt enough that we kind of talk about those things.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But en route to going to a fundraiser for somebody who you would not like,
That's okay.
But,
that's okay.
Right. But
I am not closed-minded. I can, as long as I'm treated with respect, I will respect my opponents.
And that's a good, and the show tends to be 5 to 10% me too. So this is a little more me to set us up for where we're going here. I mean, I'm about half and half. I mean, I've voted in elections. I think I've got one more Democrat than Republican vote in presidential elections. I'm a registered Republican in California. And that's not because...
Do they exist?
They do. And I'm not a true believer, especially now. That's my position because it allows me to find who I think is the best of that crowd of people and support those people.
Sure.
Right? Because the Democrats are going to sort out themselves. I'm not going to help, especially in California, being registered in my voting places in Hollywood, in the Hollywood Hills. So that voting place is not going to make a difference on the Democratic side, but I might be able to find like who I think is the best of the other side, you know, on the elections that matter. And I have make no bones about the policy.
Artists should be rebels.
Well, I'm trying to, I think that
artists should be
the fact that I just admitted that on a mic is fairly rebellious.
What surprises me is that true artists, I've always had this image that they're the real rebels. But then when I see what's going on in America, they're the establishment now.
Well, I think it's, I think it depends on, it's case by case, and we could drill down into that. But, and I'm not saying this to skip it. If you want to talk more about that, let's drill into it. But what I wanted to get to was specifically, you mentioned this polarizing debate in the States. And that leads to, feeding back to our theme of China-related things on this show, people don't have, generally speaking, there's not a real understanding of what China is, much less how to deal with it. And people are coming from preconceived notions.
Exactly.
They're forming opinions based on stereotypes that were sold to them by somebody with this or an opposing agenda.
Yeah.
So I
read about this every day.
Right, exactly. And this is your stock and trade. Yeah. So how do you, from your work, it's obvious to me, but people maybe just, I assume hopefully all your listeners will listen to the show because then our numbers go up.
Yeah.
But people who don't know your stuff, or just for you to say it succinctly, how do you summarize China for people like you go back home, right? Okay. You meet people who don't read you back in Dallas. Yeah. How do you summarize what China actually is to people who have some kind of a really backwards opinion or uninformed opinion about it?
I would say, first of all, the mainstream media does not always tell the truth. What you hear about fake news is real fake news. If they're going to lie about Trump, they're going to lie about China, they're going to lie about Russia, they're going to lie about a lot. So if you really want to understand the real China, if you can, come and visit. Mm-hmm. If you can't, try to do more reading, try to meet people who are from China, find some way to communicate with those people, find some way to learn different ways. But the fact is the mainstream media is just, you're not going to get your information about China from them. It's so negative.
Right.
And it's an extremely negative form. It's this description of Chinese are doing espionage. They're up to Marx's, global domination.
The Confucius Institute. So
but I met the guy who was the founder of the Confucius Institute. He used to work at China Radio International. He was very excited to open up these think tanks because he wanted to teach people Chinese language. He wanted to teach people about traditional Chinese culture. So of course, I'm sure he was shocked when all of a sudden these media stories came out that he was some type of Marxist globalist.
Well, my partner Ying Lee, that her initial forays into several countries were through that. She was a speaker and educator through that. That's how she actually. Yeah. And at least in her case, she's not an agent for anybody. She's trying to trying to build those bridges.
Sure.
Yeah. So what is your take on the state of things these days? I'm going to ask a super broad question because we can go anywhere with this. But in terms of the state of things as we sit here right now, end of April 2019, with China, in terms of trying to find its footing on the world stage as it's growing into its big boy and big girl pants.
Well, recently they just had the Belt and Road Forum.
Right.
And this is a major project China's been working on. I think the problem that occurs is that there's so many suspicions about China. China does have an image problem, so that even when they do something like the Belt and Road, is viewed in a strange or suspicious manner and conspiratorial manner. Mm-hmm. What the world should realize is the Belt and Road is here to help you. Either you make deals or you don't make deals. It's your decision. If you don't want to sign up to an infrastructure project, you don't have to. No one's forcing you. So now there's some topic about debt issues. You're going to fall into debt.
Yeah, debt diplomacy.
It's still the decision of the country. China's not forcing that country. And then a lot of these countries are very poor. They can't afford to build their own railways on their own.
Right.
They need help. But if you make it charity, how do they learn how to do business? They have to learn how to do business, because if you don't, then they just become charity cases. And this is what I think what the mistake that a lot of Westerners made is when they went to these poor countries, they just gave them a lot of money, they turned into charity cases, and they no longer appreciate the gifts that were given to them. But when you do a business deal, you are expected to honor your side of the bargain. And that's what China's doing. And that's a way of them showing respect to these other small countries.
How do you reconcile your views about Trump with your feelings about China?
Of course. And this is why I wrote the book.
Right.
I wanted to do a fair and balanced book. So it not just supports Xi in China, but also supports Trump. But at the same time, points to the mistakes that happen on China's side and points to the mistakes that happen on Trump's side. But the thing is I really believe in this kind of book. And I had told my publisher when I had written the proposal, nobody but me can write this book. Because either they're going to be pro-China or they're going to be pro-Trump.
Yeah, it seems like a real dichotomy here.
That's I know how to make it a neutral book. Yeah. I know how to write it in a neutral manner. Because I want a win-win deal. Yeah. I really want a win-win deal to succeed.
Right. Well, I mean, again, and as we established, I mean, I'm not on his team in terms of many things, but I mean, I want my country to succeed.
Of course.
So, and I think if you don't, there's a problem
there's something
with
odd
that.
about that.
Exactly. So in that sense, I mean, I'm hoping. I'm hoping. I'm hoping for the best of any outcome where our representatives are negotiating on our behalf and things. But in terms of perhaps people thinking incorrectly. This is not an accusation because I know the difference. But in terms of people who have a superficial glance, maybe thinking you're in the tank for China a bit and wondering why.
I get it all the time.
Yeah. How do you, I mean, being it's not the case, I'd like to hear your take on this.
Well, people are always going to have their own opinions. And I would imagine, yes, you're going to, every once in a while, if they don't agree with you, they're going to label you. It's just the nature of the publicity business. Yeah. If you don't get labeled, no one cares about you. So I'll probably be known as the hardcore pro-Trump guy, but also the hardcore pro-China. And I'm sure people will find that very odd. So it was fortunate that my first real book to come out was able to address the issues of America and also China. So it's not just about a matter of numbers, but it's also about the cultural issues. For example, that America First is really important to the Americans, to the ordinary people. And also I addressed the fact that you had this issue in America of elitism. And it's the elites that feel, the ordinary voters that supported Trump feel that it was the elites and it was the globalists who betrayed them. So this is why they are so strongly supportive of Trump. So my book wants to explain to the Chinese readers why this trade wars was inevitable and why it needed to happen. But at the same time, if the Chinese understand that, they can find a way for compromise. And then while I was writing the book, I had the opportunity to talk to some Chinese trade officials. I explained things that I had written about in my book. They're like, wow, let's try it. Now they're having wonderful talks.
Oh, well, very nice. So how do you reconcile the fact that you mentioned globalist as if it's a four-letter word, of
exactly.
course, and which I don't hold that opinion, because I mean I see that as this is the inevitability of I look
and
at
I don't want to happen.
Well, I look at it in terms of trade and being able to move freely and things like this. I mean, I don't think anybody's. Let's not debate it because I think it's silly. But I mean, I don't think anybody's really for open borders. I think this is that political issue is a different issue. I think it's out of fear of brown people, frankly, in many cases. But
there's no racism on my side.
Oh no! I'm not. I'm not trying to say that.
Oh, you're pro-Trump. You must be a racist.
Oh, I wasn't trying to impart that. Yeah. I think if you listen back to this, I wasn't trying to shade that way. Where I'm going with this is to say, because of what I said, I felt like I need to mention where I'm coming from here. But getting to the fact that President Xi's speech is about what China's going to do to make China better and stronger and to enhance its place on the global stage and basically promoting globalism in a way.
It's a different style of globalism.
Right.
And I address that in my book.
So we'll talk about it.
Yeah, exactly.
You've got a microphone here, so let's talk about it.
Well, the globalism is more about focusing on business side without the politics. So when you're doing the Belt and Road, you're focusing on infrastructure. Do they want a bigger shipping port? Do they want a new airport? Do they need new railway lines? It's just about that. It's just about the business of. I think the problem, and I had addressed this also in my book about why I believe globalism is going to fade away. It's not going to be as powerful as it used to be, partly because I think the elites have lost touch with the regular people. And then at the same time, it became too politicized. If you focus on this idea of not open borders, but open trade, even Trump supports that. He went to the EU, says, if you want 0% tariffs, if you do it, I'll do it. And also, I believe he said the same to China. At first, the Chinese said, oh, he's not serious. No, trust me. He's a businessman. If he says 0% tariffs, if you do it, he'll do it. And they've discovered that was true.
What do you think are some of the things that China is, again, the fact that we're not Chinese, with respect to that, but what are some things that you think they're really getting right, and where do you think the big growth opportunities are, to say it in a euphemistically nice but obvious way?
Well, the business. Look at Shenzhen.
Yeah.
Shenzhen is the next Silicon Valley. I really believe they're really moving fast. They're very innovative. You have Huawei. I really believe that's going to be even bigger than Apple.
Well, especially with the Chinese backing and the Chinese consumer,
of course,
supporting it,
but
right?
They're in some of their things, like for example, 5G. They're ahead of Apple already. They're like even Samsung is trying to get involved in 5G. They've recently had a rollout, and
they're having problems with folding phone, and I don't know who the hell wants one of those in the first place. But
they were just it was like I had written for Channel News Asia. It was just an issue of bad timing.
Yeah.
They heard Huawei was going to come out with the phone this summer. They wanted to be first, but they didn't do enough testing beforehand. It was just too rushed.
Right. So bigger picture in terms of what you're looking at when you look at how China is growing into this new role. What are some of the things that help encourage your optimism toward China's future?
That there's peace here. That they're not looking to invade other countries. I mean, you have certain issues that are sensitive right now,
right?
But China is not acting in an aggressive manner. There's accusations they're acting aggressive, but unless there's no bullets being shot right now.
Yeah.
Don't forget that. Because a lot of people think, oh, China's doing this, China's doing that. Well, where are the bullets? Where's the shooting?
Right. So how do you think the West, to just very generically, not just the U.S., how do you think the West needs to adapt its thinking to
just improve the communication? Have more open-minded. This idea that everyone has to be a democracy, that everyone has to be a politically correct person, allow different cultures to be themselves. Why is it that they're so tolerant, say, of Muslims, but not of the Chinese? Look at Sweden. Sweden is allowed in a lot of Muslims, but then when a Chinese tourist causes a problem, it turns into a national scandal. They do TV shows mocking the Chinese. I had written a story about that from Channel News Asia. The fact is give the Chinese a chance. If they do something to harm you, then you have every right to fight back. But there's always this image. They have this image of this evil Chinese, these evil communists. If they're so communist, then how come they're the second largest economy in the world right now and India is not? They have about the same population. There's a big difference in how the economy is here and in India. Yes, India is getting better right now, but China is still bigger, economic-wise.
How did you come to your perspective on China?
I think it was living in South Korea, and I saw so many violent protests. There was one time I walked into an anti-American protest. There was about 100,000 people.
Wow!
And then all of a sudden, I hear some guy shout out, "Look, there's an American!"
Yeah, you're a big, tall, obvious American.
Yeah,
you're obviously not Korean.
And I look, and all of a sudden, people are going in my direction.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
You thought you might end up on the news in the wrong way.
Yeah, exactly. And it really opened my mind. It opened my eyes that just because it helped me to understand that, well, maybe China is, playing it smart on the protest, because if it gets out of control, and at that time, people were dying. People were getting killed.
Okay.
There were incidents with Americans who and it was out of control. So I started to think more seriously about the issues of social order.
Okay.
And I think the Chinese because their respect for tradition and their respect for social order is such an important matter to them. I started to realize that, well, maybe there is something to be said to it. And also I started to realize that not let every country decide its own path. Okay. Mm-hmm. South Korea has decided to choose democracy. That's fine. Let them. But another country should not force another country to choose its own path. It's like they'll say in Africa, well, how come you're not, China doesn't crack down on all the corruption? And then I had talked to African diplomats when I was working some stories about Africa-China relations, and I had met some diplomats. And I asked them those questions. And I said, do you think China should try to curtail the corruption? And they said, no, we need to learn our way. We need to grow up our way because that's me. That's my land. That's my people. And so I think the American, and I see from a lot of the big Western nations, is they have this attitude that, oh, it's my way or the highway. That's totally unfair, I think.
What are you looking at as far as, as far as touchstones, or that's actually probably the wrong word, the big issues facing China right now?
U.S.-China relations.
Right.
The relations with its Asian neighbors. Mm-hmm. I would say its economy you cannot keep a strong economy forever. So how will China adapt to the real slowdown? Sooner or later, there's going to be a big hit. Will China be ready? You can't avoid the big hit in economic-wise, especially when China has grown as fast as it's been doing for the past 40 years.
Right. So how do you think the smart outsider would integrate themselves into this economy?
Start with, first of all, it's not just about the economy, but if you want to come here, do business, and you want to live and work here, the most important thing you need at the beginning is you need humility. Every time I meet someone who's very arrogant, oh, I'm so special, I can do this, I can do that. Okay, good luck.
Yeah, they might not have been here too long.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know any old timers around here who
I've been here for 10 years.
who have that attitude.
Yeah, I came in with that attitude too.
It's like a friend of mine rides motorcycles. They're what's that saying? They're old bikers and bold bikers, but there are no old bold bikers.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So, how do you find your story ideas? I mean, what actually prompts you to chase a thing?
I read the news all the time.
Yeah.
I read books all the time, so I stay updated on the news. And every morning when I'm looking for a story, I'll go on Xinhua. Xinhua, I think, is pretty good to understand China. They have some good topic selections. So my first media to look at is Xinhua for China stories. And then I will look around, of course, like your normal Google search, because I have VPN. We have VPN. And you just type in China, see what stories. But I think mainly when I'm looking for stories or someone asks me to do a topic, I'm always in touch with what's happening right now.
What's the current, what are you currently focused on? Belt and Road?
Belt and Road is a big story right now.
What do you think what do you think of the people who are, I mean, you discussed the debt thing already, but in terms of there are indications that it's not being met with the open arms that was expected. Sure. So what's your take on that?
Well, trust me, I had already anticipated that because when I first heard about Belt and Road, I just thought, oh, this is a showpiece. This is just some way for China to say we love you. But then I found out they're putting $1 trillion in it. Chinese people are very good at business. They're not going to put $1 trillion unless they expect money from it. Yeah. And I think what goes on here now is that explanation of how it's going to be used and if it's going to be used the right way. When I had been interviewed, say, for example, on Sputnik News, I also predicted China's going to have a hard time explaining. You're going to have some countries who they're going to use it through politics. So if you have a project, you'll have environmental groups, you'll have social activist groups, and they'll find something wrong with it. And the problem is in China you can get away with it, but when you go to democracies, everyone has a voice.
Right.
And that's what I think China's gonna. It takes time, but they're starting to slowly figure that out.
Do you see the culture around that specific issue you just touched on of people's voice being heard? Do you see that changing anytime soon?
Well, with the voice being heard, I'm also big on fairness. So let's say, for example, if a small African village in Zambia wants to build a bridge, but suddenly you have environmentalists say, oh, it's not environmentally friendly. But the small African village in Zambia, they need the bridge. That helps, so they can do trade, so they can transport goods across the river. So when I talk about the voiceless, I'm talking about fairness as well. The voiceless who deserve a fair shot. So especially that's why I enjoy observing what's happening in the emerging markets, in the third world, because they deserve their opportunities too. They deserve to industrialize. I think Africa, you're going to see a lot of industrialization. You're going to see the economy booming. But if you try to stop the industrialization, Africa cannot succeed like China. Now, of course, you're going to have the environmental issues. But the fact is if you need to succeed, sometimes you're just going to have to make some tough decisions. Africa has to decide how much industrialization do they want. The more, then there's more money. But if there's less money. But let the Africans decide what they want.
Is there something that, I'm going to paraphrase, this is a Peter Thiel question that Tim Ferriss likes to paraphrase, and I'm going to just blatantly acknowledge those references and just ask you the damn question, which is, do you hold, what's a opinion that you hold dear that's very contrary to conventional wisdom, or I won't say popular opinion because that varies, but what's something that you think about the state of things or the future related specifically to China, since that's the focus of this conversation, that you think is not what other people think?
Well, I would say by being more positive than most Westerners on China, that alone makes me different. I think that on the issue of democracy, it's let the country decide for itself. But of course, some can argue, well, then look at Myanmar. There was all this stuff. Well, the fact is, yes, some people will suffer. Some people will suffer the consequences. But if they want it bad enough, they'll die for it. It's a little bit harsh. A little bit harsh, I agree. And there's your answer. But the fact is if you want something deep enough, you have to be willing to sacrifice your life. I'm willing to sacrifice my life. So if I'm wrong about China and China didn't want peace, I'm probably not going to survive. I know that.
You mentioned that, from time to time you've popped up on the show on CGTN, formerly CCTV English Dialogue, which is known for its, spirited debates.
Of course.
And you're the host, one of the hosts, jokingly messaging you to come back on and have a nice scream fest. What do you get screamy about on there?
Well, because I'm pro-Trump.
In the non-screamy voice.
Because I'm pro-Trump.
Okay.
And I don't deny it.
Well, so look, again, I'm from the South, and as you would imagine, I still have friends and, a handful of family, but most of my family is not. But obviously there's still people who I love and respect who who would be in your camp on this issue. For the sake of us California lefties, enlighten me in the friendly way. Since we're having a friendly conversation, this is actually something that I sussed this from obviously knowing your work. And I sincerely am curious, sell me without the personality stuff.
When I'm talking to a leftist.
Yeah.
China is really trying to reduce its pollution.
Okay.
And it needs help. I think California companies that are involved in the renewables and with the clean tech, they should come to China to help out and invest.
Well, I'm saying sell me on why I should like Trump.
Oh, well,
that was the question. Sorry, I guess that setup was too oblique.
Yeah, exactly. Because I'm so used to dealing with China, but it's a hard sell. But I would say for Trump, what do you admire? I mean, it's a serious question. I think what I admire most about Trump is he's a fighter. We've had too many Republicans who they wimped out. And I was looking for a Republican who just said, look, I don't care how much the media attacks me. I don't care how much criticism I get. I'm going to stand for my convictions. Those are the kind of people I really respect. It's the same thing I see about China. They stand up for their convictions. They don't change just because outsiders criticize them. I really admire that.
Is there somebody? Let's assume that he doesn't run in the next. I mean, I think he's planning to. Obviously, he's running now. In an alternate universe, okay, or Earth adjacent.
Okay.
Who else would you like to see in that job? Who else do you like? I'm trying to get a sense because he's such an anomaly because he wasn't a Republican for most of his life. And
I mean, there's something about his character as a street fighter I really admire.
Okay.
So the fact is the other Republicans I could not support at the moment. I mean, I was a conservative Republican, so there was a time I supported Ted Cruz, but Trump just totally obliterated Cruz. And you know what? I discovered Cruz was not as great as I thought he was. You have to handle the fire. Trump is the fire. I mean, he's a fire. No matter how much fire you give him, he fires back. People like me and a lot of his Trump supporters, we respect that. I think deep down it's like we love him because of it.
What is it that you think people and there's been a lot said about it, so I'm not reinventing the conversational wheel with this question, but I want to hear your take on this, and maybe we can get to something that's different, because at least it's going to be personal here. What do you think people in general, let's not say leftists or the left, what do you think people who are not on the Trump train are missing about how you mentioned the fire thing, but what are people missing about the connection and the fascination? Because again, that base, though a statistical minority, is as diehard. It is as locked in. It's not moving. It's a locked in number. Yeah.
But how do you increase his base? In other words, it's a hard challenge. But I believe that when Trump was trying to create peace on the Korean Peninsula, that was a major move, because when he first started, he's mocking Kim Jong-un. He's saying my nuke button is bigger than yours. But then he showed that he was sincere about peace. I also believe that Trump was supportive of this idea of stopping endless wars. But what does concern me is Bolton. A lot of people I'm talking to who have concerns, who sometimes come to me for advice, Bolton is their biggest problem.
Yeah. And what's their problem with him?
Well, he wants war.
Yeah, exactly.
But outside Bolton, I see Trump as the guy who's really, he can create peace. And many people don't see that because of Bolton.
How do you think the Chinese misplayed or misunderstood him initially?
They underestimated him, and I reconfirmed that. They admitted that. They underestimated him. They kept seeing all the media stories, and they believed it. They thought he was going to be impeached first year.
What do you think is the reality of the relationship now?
It's much better. They're happy. They're happy.
But why? Let's
They're happy because they know that if there is a U.S.-China trade deal, it's going to be a fair deal. It's not going to be an unfair deal. It's about fairness of both sides. Chinese at times took advantage of some scenarios on tech transfers.
Yeah, IP stuff is my issue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's a new law in China, the foreign investment law, that was rewritten. It was written specifically because of the U.S.-China trade wars, but they want to show fairness too. And it's going to be in the long-term benefit for China as well, because once they're respected and once they play by the fairness rules, then other companies and other countries will be more interested in investing into China.
With your upcoming book, we're sort of, kind of unapproached to land the plane is my metaphor I use. With the book, when it comes out, what is really your meta goal with this, besides of course selling millions? But in terms of the value for it, I mean, what do you hope to have as the response, the result for that?
I want my message is that I support that message of peace and prosperity, and that you can have two countries that are completely different, that at one time Xi and Trump were very angry at each other.
No.
We're saying some very shocking things, especially from Trump's side. I fully admit that, and I showed that in the book. And at times when he had said that, I said it was wrong in my book. I called Trump to task. But you had a scenario of these two warring parties, well, not warring, but trade warring parties.
Sure, well, verbally.
Trade warring parties. And then now, if there's a U.S.-China trade deal, it shows how the impossible can become possible. And that when Trump and his team started to think more about the cultural issues, they saw common ground. They saw areas of compromise. So instead of taking the extremist viewpoint, which is someone like Peter Navarro, who I say in my book was Trump's biggest mistake, was assigning Navarro as his trade guy.
That was a bit on the nose.
Yeah. Lighthizer did a great job because he's a stand-up guy. Of course he's going to support America, but at the same time he supports fairness as well. So when I was asked for some advice, and I told the Chinese, focus on the concept of fairness. Let Lighthizer know that. And then once they tried that, suddenly Lighthizer became more supportive. The U.S. trade team became supportive. People like Navarro, they're extremists. So no matter what you tell them, unless you surrender 100%, they'll never support you.
He's never going to be happy with anything that's not a complete and total surrender. And no one's
so the real message from my book is to show how you can achieve peace and prosperity with this example of how the U.S.-China trade talks. Show an open mind. Show a willingness to compromise. Accept different cultures for who they are. Don't force them to be. Okay? When you focus on that concept of fairness, both sides can create a win-win deal.
What do you see in your estimation of this as you look at the various players and the pieces on the table? What do you see as the best case scenario in the next, couple 3 years? What does it look like in kind of the near term?
The best case scenario is you're going to see great ties between U.S. and China. And when you see great ties between U.S. and China, there's going to be peace on Asia. You're not going to hear all of this stuff that's going on in the South China Sea. You're going to probably get some resolution with some of its neighbors in some of its territories of China. You're not going to hear as much noise. By having a strong U.S.-China relations, and Beijing understands this, that when you have strong relations there, China is now a crucial player in the global game. But at the same time, they can focus on the economics and the Belt and Road. And I believe sooner or later, the U.S. will also sign the Belt and Road.
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome. Tom, what's the best question I didn't ask you?
Let me see. It's interesting because when I interview people, I just keep throwing out questions. I never interviewed myself. How about this? Maybe you can ask me I'm not
cutting this.
Okay,
we're rolling here.
Another follow up to what is advice you'd like to give to people coming to China, as I said earlier about humility.
Yeah.
The fact is China is a great country. It's a wonderful country. There's wonderful people here. But at the same time, you have to accept China for what it is. You're not going to change China. China changes you.
Exactly. Tom, thanks so much, man.
No problem.
All right, that's the show this week. Don't forget to visit crazyinagooday.com. You can check the link directly in this episode to go right to Tom's blog post or just scour around the site a bit and you'll learn about the other podcasts I do and check out some of the other 85 or so or 90 interviews that I've done with people. Plus, there's a bunch of bonus episodes where I'm just talking about who knows what. Thanks for listening, and I will see you next week with Kevin Geiger on Return of the Fretful Aloy Radio Hour.